Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Rarely Typical, a podcast where I am talking about living life with a chronic illness, finding hope, and also living a life that is rarely typical. Today, it's just me, and I am wanting to talk a little bit about my 7-year Diagnosi-versary that I just celebrated. At the time of this recording, it was like 2 days ago, and I have so many thoughts about what celebrating your diagnosis looks like and how my life has changed so dramatically from when I was diagnosed to now. When I was diagnosed and I was in the hospital, I had a doctor come in and he said to me, it's really bad. And if you don't start treatment immediately, you're going to die. And at the time, he gave me this timeline of about a year without treatment. And it was so devastating to me in that moment. And I remember how I felt when that happened. And I remember the crushing weight of thinking, I'm never going to see my kids grow up. I'm never going to, put my toes in the sand because at the time we were in Colorado. And I thought, I'm not even going to see my next birthday. And it was the week of my husband's birthday when I was diagnosed. So I was just horrified that this was going to be his birthday present, was hearing that his wife would not make it to her own birthday. And I just remember feeling so heartbroken in that moment and so devastated. And looking back at it now, 7 years later, like, thank you, Jesus, for more time. And today I want to chat about what led from my diagnosis and where I am today. So while I was in the hospital, and I know that if you guys listened to my diagnosis story before, you know that this girl came to the hospital and she had the same story as me. She was post-diagnosis, like 5 years, I think, at this point. And she came in and she was normal and she was wearing her pump and she was in school to be a teacher and she had children the same age as my kids. And I just remember thinking that if she could do it, I could do it. And that honestly was the beginning of my advocacy journey. And like, here I am 7 years later. Look at us now having this podcast, the crazy roller coaster that has been social media, all of the great opportunities and all of these things that have come from this moment that was so defining. But at the time, neither she or I knew how impactful it was going to be. When she left that room, I remember thinking, man, that was so needed for me mentally. But it was also one of those moments where I look back and I think that was the catalyst that changed the trajectory of where I was going. And I thought I wanted to be that person for someone else. So I started advocating, and honestly, my advocating journey did not start out looking like I was trying to advocate. It was mostly that I was sharing my story on social media because our families were across the country. Our friends were across the country. I couldn't respond to all of these text messages. I couldn't respond to all the phone calls that we were getting about me being in the hospital. And so I was sharing on social media because it was really just a streamlined way of keeping everybody up to date. I have a marketing background. And so I feel like I've always had my profile as public. And so while I was posting, I would get a few followers here and there who also had pulmonary arterial hypertension. And they were like, I have never met anybody with my disease before. And I also remember that being in the hospital, I was looking for other people on social media who had my same story or had my same disease that I had never heard of. And I'd only found a couple of people, but none were really doing it in a way that I felt like was helpful for me. And so I thought, with my marketing degree, maybe I could do this. Maybe I could be that girl for someone else. Maybe I could be the girl who walks into the hospital room on social media for someone who's just diagnosed. And that's pretty much where my advocacy journey started. And I have been so thankful for the opportunities that social media has given me, that the following has given me. I have sat at some really important tables. I've shaken some really important hands. But all of that would have never happened had this girl not walked into that hospital room that day. You and I would probably not be sitting here, you listening to me on this podcast or watching me on this YouTube video. you probably wouldn't be seeing me doing this had that not happened. And I think there are a couple of reasons for that. I think that often when you are diagnosed with an illness, one, you're already dealing with so much stuff. You're learning from a fire hose. I started on a pump immediately, so I'm learning about a medical device. I'm learning about a condition I didn't know I had. I'm trying to figure out what that looks like for my family going forward. I'm trying to think of last wills and what I want my funeral to look like. And I was also coming to the grips of what mortality at a young age looked like. And so there were so many things that were happening that obviously taking pictures and making content was not at top of mind. It was actually not even on the radar. But I was taking pictures and I was documenting what I was doing because we were trying to keep up with our friends and our family and let them know what was happening. So I was looking at social media and I remember seeing a couple of people who had posted about their pumps. And I remember thinking, wow, like if I had had that when I was in the hospital and I was dealing with what do I carry this thing in? How do I shower with it? What do I do when I'm sleeping? If I had had somebody talking about those things when I was in the hospital, I feel like it would have been a little less daunting to leave that hospital room. Another thing that I feel like I was also struggling with when I was diagnosed was I was in the hospital and I was seeing all of this representation for other diseases and other disease spaces, cancer, diabetes, all of these other diseases that you see more often than something like a rare disease like pulmonary hypertension. And I just felt really alone. And I know that at the moment, like I probably could have done more research, but I also just wasn't in the mental state being told, like, now you might not have more than a year to live. And so I think that I would have felt a lot less alone had I been able to find just one person whose story did not look horrible, that did not result in death the way they were telling me it was going to look for my future. And so when I was in the hospital, I started documenting, but I wasn't documenting for me. I was documenting for our friends and family. And I also was just mostly just putting it down because writing and blogging is very cathartic for me. It's something that I have done since I was, a kid in middle school when I had my first computer. I was a blogger. And I think blogging has translated into what I'm doing now. That and my marketing degree have been a perfect storm for this. But I have always been better at understanding my feelings and working through my feelings when I write it down. And so a lot of my posts were mostly like mini blogs, and I was writing everything down because I wanted to remember them, but I also wanted to give my husband and my kids just a little insight into my brain. Funny thing, if you don't know me, I don't talk about my feelings a lot. It's just genuinely not something that I do. Me and my unofficial therapist have talked about this many times. I definitely packed those things away. I compartmentalize my feelings a lot. And I only do well talking about my feelings if I'm writing it down. And so this was a very good way for my husband to get a peek into my brain as to what was happening because most of the time I was either crying or I was just sitting there completely silent because I was so shocked and could not believe that this wasn't some crazy dream. And so the advocating really didn't look like advocating to me. But as I was sharing and as I'm writing these mini blog captions, I started getting people who also had pulmonary arterial hypertension messaging me and saying, hey, I also have this and I haven't met anybody else with it. And 7 years ago, it did not look like it does now on social media. There's a lot of pulmonary arterial hypertension advocates. There's a lot of Facebook groups, but at the time I was having a really hard time finding them. And it just felt like I was getting to be that girl in the hospital for someone else. And so I thought, I can keep doing this if it's helping people, if it's sharing my story in an authentic way, and it was connecting with people. Like, what harm could it do? I have been so thankful for this advocating journey. It has been so healthy for me to get those feelings out on paper, but it's also been so healing for me to be that girl for other people. I don't think I realized how much it was healing me until I met some of the friends that I have who also have PH, or have gotten messages from people who were diagnosed because of something I said, or were brave enough to go advocate for themselves after something that I've posted. And there's a lot of healing in that for me, because at the time I felt very isolated and alone. And I had a lot of hurt on my own because of that. And so the healing of that hurt was helping somebody else not deal with that type of hurt by feeling alone and isolated in a hospital room right after diagnosis. I have shared my story so many times, and honestly, I think that I could do it in my sleep. I don't share a lot of the parts that make me cry, because there are still parts of my journey that I will still get emotional about, because it's a very emotional thing. But those stories have created some amazing connections. I've made some really great friends in the pharmaceutical space. I've made some really great partners, and I have worked with some really cool people. And it has been so beautiful to see that those connections have created change. And all of that change starts with a story. It starts with a genuine connection where someone can look at you and say, oh, I remember that disease because of this person, or I remember that conversation with this person, or I remember this post because of that person, because that change in their mind creates action in their actual jobs. And so some of my favorite connections have been the ones with pharmaceutical companies that make medications that we all take. It has been so cool to see them remember my story, remember parts of my story that I don't even remember sharing. And that creates this motivation for change and action. And action, honestly, at the end of the day, creates hope. And so somebody was able to hear my story, hear other patients' stories, and remember those things when they go into their labs and their testing sites. And they're able to look at those things and say, oh my gosh, we could make something that makes this easier for these people. And that piece of like hope that they are offering when they remember things about us is so huge. And so one of my favorite things that I say all the time is stories create connection, connection creates change, change creates action, and action creates hope. And I firmly stand on that is why I advocate, is because these people who make these big decisions are on social media. They're at these conferences that I go to, and it only takes one story, and it might not even be mine. It only takes one story for them to say, oh, I remember that. And I remember that being a pain point for them. And maybe there's something we can do about that. And that is all the hope that somebody that is dealing with a disease like this, who doesn't have a cure, who doesn't have good medical devices, it is so important for them to remember us when they are in the process of doing those things. Honestly, advocating for me has just been about making change and creating hope for the people that are going to be doing this in the future. The internet lives on forever. And so my hope is that this content will be evergreen, that it will live long past however long I live, and that someone 20 or 30 years from now can look back at these videos and listen to this podcast and think, wow, that really resonated with me. It's funny because social media has become this like wildfire in my life. I have been viral. My following is big, and I've gotten some really great opportunities from social media. I have been so thankful for it, and I'm thankful for the connections that I've made. And so when I am asked for interviews, I often get the question, so what is your goal? And it's funny in the hindsight of a 7 years post diagnosis that people will ask me, what is your goal going forward? And I think that it's comical. I always laugh a little bit because it's such a big question when you, as the person interviewing, probably have a really small view of what that question really holds. When you don't face mortality, when you don't face a doctor telling you you don't have that much longer to live, your goal is different in that moment. The goal pre-diagnosis, before you come face to face with mortality, looks a lot like getting a new career, figuring out your career, getting married, buying a house. And those are fine. Those are cool and all. But for me, 7 years ago, sitting in that hospital room, the only goal I had was to see my kids walk that year. It was to hug my husband at our next anniversary or make it to my birthday, make it to Christmas. And yeah, it's cool and all to get a promotion and get a raise and buy a car. But like in the grand scheme of life, it genuinely doesn't mean that much. And so when someone asks me what my goal is, I always kind of chuckle because unless you have faced mortality at a young age, your goals are going to be very basic. They're going to be the big things that you're dealing with your career and your job and your marriage. But for me, I just wanted the little things. I wanted to make it in a year. I didn't know if I would be here now, 7 years later. My goal is honestly very simple. I just want to live. I want to continue to live and to get more time to live and make the most of the time that I get. Honestly, everything else, all of this advocating, the influence, the speaking, all of these opportunities, they're really just a bonus. It's just been very great to have these opportunities. I'm not ever going to be one of those people that is not humbled by the experience, but it's honestly not important to me the way people expect it to be, especially when I'm in an interview. I just want to live. I tell people all the time, I'm just riding the wave of this advocating because genuinely my goal is to make it to the next year. My goal is to make it to the next Diagnosi-versary. So this is my 7-year Diagnosi-versary. And some patients don't make it this long. Some people go undiagnosed, and by the time they're diagnosed, they are too far gone. They have needed a transplant and weren't able to get one. And so I just want to live. I want to live. I want to live a full and happy life. And honestly, everything else is just extra. So when I get the question of what is your goal, that is my goal. My goal is to continue to be able to do this stuff for you guys and to continue to, advocate for those people who need somebody in their lives to make them feel less alone. But it's also just to, see my kids grow up and walk them down the aisle at their wedding and be able to do that first mother-son dance with them. I just want to see them graduate from high school. I want to see me and my husband make it to 20 years married when we just celebrated our 10-year. And everything else is just extra. It is so great to make it to 7 years. And I've met other PH patients who have been 20 years post-diagnosis. And those stories are so important because they create hope for me. They create hope for the people who are, in the middle of diagnosis, in the middle of learning what their disease is, and people who have been diagnosed for less than 10 years. Those stories of 20 plus years are so impactful when it comes to my mental health. It gives me so much hope just hearing that from people that yeah, maybe I can make it 20 years. But I don't know. This disease is so weird. It affects people differently. It can be a snowflake disease in a sense where nobody's story looks the same. So the stories of people making it 20 and 30 years is so hopeful for people like me who are not even 10 years into diagnosis. So I'm going to close this out by telling you what has been the most impactful over the last 7 years for me. I could do an entire podcast episode on advice and all of that stuff. But really, some of the things that I've written down that I feel like are the most important is number one, healing on earth does not always look like boom, you're healed, your leg is no longer broken. Now you can walk. You're blind and now you can see. Sometimes healing looks like medicine. And I have been so thankful to be on the clinical trial that I'm on. I have seen miraculous results from it. And honestly, that's enough healing for me. I'm happy to get the healing. I'm happy to get the full body healing miracle that the doctor could not comprehend miracle. But I also understand medicine sometimes looks like healing. And that has been one of the biggest things that I've learned in these 7 years. Something else that I've learned in these 7 years is that we don't know what we're made of until the worst possible moment happens. And for me, that was diagnosis. Not knowing what I could handle, not knowing who I was, not knowing what was truly important to me. I think that we're surprised by the end of our journeys, looking back and seeing what we've become. I am not the same girl I was when I was diagnosed. I don't even recognize the girl I was pre-diagnosis, and I am thankful for that. The me now does not dwell on all of the small things. I pick my battles because is it important to me enough to worry when I'm getting all of this extra time? Is it something that I want to be fighting over? Is it something that is worth my time at the end of the day? Because I don't have a lot of it. I have less time, I feel like, than anyone else. And maybe that might not be true, but I like to think about it in the grand scheme of life. Like, what is truly important to me? And are some of these battles that we pick worth it? Who I was pre-diagnosis would have told you those battles were worth it. But now my battles are very calculated. They're very thought through. And I do not pick battles that I think are unimportant anymore. I also will not spend another moment catering to this disease. It has taken so much from me. It will not take my identity. It will not take who I am. And I will no longer only be focusing on my disease. It has taken a lot for me. It honestly has. But it has also given me so many things. And so a lot of it has to do with your mindset and how you choose to view your disease and all of those things. I have gotten a lot of hate for saying that this disease has given me more than it's taken. And I genuinely do believe that. It has given me opportunities. It's given me purpose. It's given me platform. It's given me influence. It's given me the ability to reach people and to touch people's lives in a way that I probably never could have or had considered. I do believe that this disease has given me a lot and it's taken a lot and it has changed my perspective. It's changed my life, but it has given me a great outlook on life. And I will always, always be thankful that I know who I am now. And I don't know if I would have gotten there had it not been for this diagnosis. And the most important thing I think that I can take away from the 7 years and that I hope that you take away from this podcast is getting older means that you got to stay. Getting older means that you had the luxury of a really long life. And not everybody gets to see themselves grow old. Not everybody gets to have wrinkles and have gray hair. And I probably never would have considered growing old to be such an amazing achievement. But when you are faced with mortality at a young age, you only want to be able to say, now I'm old. Now I am 80. Now I am 90. I have lived a full life. And I want to say that I lived a full life now. I want to look back and be able to say I did everything I could in the time that I was given. But getting old is such an amazing thing that we, I think, take for granted. And society tells us that being old is like not cool and you need Botox and you need fillers and you need to always look young. I think that being able to say that you have wrinkles and gray hair is such an amazing reward for a full life. So those are the things I have for you today. I'm sorry if this was a rambling podcast. I have been a little rusty. I have taken a long break, but I'm back and I'm ready and I'm excited. Thank you guys for listening today. Thank you for listening to me share a little bit of my heart with you on this 7-year Diagnosi-versary. I am hoping for 7, 14, 21 more years. So if you love this, please like it, please subscribe, and I will be back next week. Bye.